have invited me on this occasion. To start with, let me first put a disclaimer. I am no longer with Coal India. I have retired from the service of the company in February 2011, and therefore whatever I speak are my personal views. They are not the views of the company. That is to be, I must put that disclaimer, and that also makes things easier in the sense that I can, if I wish, I may not be required to do so, even criticize the company, which I wouldn't have been able to do till February 2011. As you have seen in the recent press reports, the company which launched its IPO in 2010, November, charted a very incredible story and became the most valued company in the country day before yesterday. Of course, the company has its credit, definitely. The share price has gone up by 62% from the point of time when it was listed 9 months back, and a price movement quite contrary to the movement in share index and the prices of other major scrips. But to gain the first position, I would say that the earlier first, the decline in the stock price of that was more helpful than Coal India's increase. Well, as you all know, coal is not the hottest of things to talk about, and it has been rather a very understated kind of a story. Coal India's story has never been a very great thing to talk about, particularly because the commodity doesn't look very good, and if you touch the commodity, your hands also look the same. So with these two features, the commodity was never found very interesting. Also, it started its journey way back in 1975, and right from the beginning it was into losses. It was one of those loss-making, laid-back PSUs. It's to be looked upon like that. I have very clear analysis as to how those losses, why those losses took place, and I have explained in many forums that these losses were actually they were made to losses. It was born sick. It was made to be born sick. It is not Coal India's making. It is the conditions in which Coal India was formed that is responsible for the losses. So we shouldn't be taking the blame. Rather, the formation of Coal India led to a situation where the growth rate in coal production changed from less than 2% 10 years prior to nationalization. If you look at it, it was less than 2% to more than 5%. And the government practiced the philosophy of coal at any cost, open projects without looking at viability. So therefore, a company operating under those conditions, completely financed by the government for its capital expenditure, can't be expected to make profits in any case. So that continued. Why it all changed? Coal India wouldn't have changed. It would have gone on the same way. The government changed. In 91, from 75 to 91, the same thing continued. It was a very closed kind of company working only on government budgetary support. 50% of the money coming by way of equity, 50% by way of loan. Implementing all kinds of projects, disregarding financial viability, hence incurring losses year after year, but growing at more than 5%. Coal production moved up from 78 million tons to 178 million tons during that period. And that was critically necessary to sustain the desired growth rate of 5%. That was to be the desired growth rate in those days, not 8-9% of today's. So it was necessary, no doubt. But that was the system. I mean, since you are working on government money, you don't bother about losses or profits. In 91, the government discovered it can't continue with that policy. It fell out of funds. It faced huge economic problems. Had to pledge gold in the UK market to discharge some of the short-term liabilities, and decided that it can't continue like this. In July 91, when the new government came, the present Prime Minister became the Finance Minister, was the Finance Minister at that time. He announced sort of phasing out of budgetary support and arm's length distance with the PSUs. That was the time when Coal India was required to stand up on its own feet. I would say that the company has, at all points of crisis, implemented certain policies which were aimed at transparency, which are aimed at clarity, and that is the reason which has actually moved it from the situation where it found itself in 1991, with 40% of the equity eroded through cumulative losses and more than 2,200 crores of unpaid arrears of debt servicing to government, to today's position, where the company is valued at 250,000 crores. Let me describe one or two processes. I mean, I'd not like to bore you daily. As Giresh has said, few minutes. So I'd restrict it to maybe 10 minutes. But some of these processes, I think, were well conceived. They have been properly implemented, and that is the reason why the company has come to where it is today. The first issue was the 1991 problem, when suddenly the government decided to walk out, and large number of ongoing projects were going on, large number of funding support was required, but it was decided that the funding support would be slashed from something like 100% to less than 30% in the 8th plan period, that is 2092 to 97. The way Coal India tackled it, I have a great respect for the management in those times. I was playing a key role, but as an officer in the department, so I had quite an intimate knowledge about the whole thing, but the decisions were taken at a much higher level. First decision was that, okay, if the government is not there, then henceforth we are not going to invest in any project which is not financially viable. Doesn't make sense. Let us be very clear. So we must get away from the syndrome of investing wherever possible. So how does the country meet its coal requirement? I mean, it was very difficult exercise, because to tell the general managers, the company had about 80 areas, 80 general managers producing in the production areas, and they all have grown up implementing projects right, left and center without looking at financial viability. So suddenly this new concept that unless there is a financial viability, 16% internal rate of return, don't touch a project. This was very difficult for them to adjust. 1992, no default to government on debt service payments, and I still remember, because I was the head of treasury at that time in Coal India, if I wanted not to pay to the government on a particular date and pay it 5 days later, it required the permission from the chairman. It was not easy to do that. So that was the kind of discipline. Okay, you may not have money to pay salaries, but this can't be compromised. We created a track record of 3 years of absolutely timely debt service, completely contrary to the position that was there earlier to that. And then approached the government that this 2,200 crores is not our making. These liabilities have arisen because of faulty policies. So therefore you take care of that. And the government in February 96 did that. They waived a part of it, converted part into preference equity, allowed moratorium on some other portion, so that was clear. The third most important reform that was done, I would say these are the best in-class reforms done at the time when the reforms was introduced in the country. We had the habit of moving money from profit-making subsidiary to loss-making subsidiary as if these are all dukans, shops, some departments. So ECL, BCCL, they were perennially sick companies and they had problems paying salaries or something of the sort. So pick up some money from Northern Coalfields and give it to them.